afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Do Good to Lead Well Through Crisis VIP webinar series. My name is Craig Dowden. I'm an executive coach and keynote speaker on positive leadership, and thrilled that you took this time out of your Tuesday afternoon to join us. And I'm really excited about having this conversation with Anne Whelan. For those of you who have been here before, welcome back. It's awesome to have you join us again for inspiring and thought-provoking conversations around how we can do good to lead well and how we can make positive contributions in our organizations and communities. And for those of you who are new to this series, welcome aboard. Great to have you with us. And essentially, this series was launched initially before the release of my first book, Do Good to Lead Well. And I have the profound privilege to speak with top CEOs, best-selling authors, and TED speakers, and wanted to share their learning, their insight with a broader community and initiate a conversation. And then with COVID, when COVID-19 came upon us 2 years ago, remarkable to think about that, I launched the Do Good to Lead Well Through Crisis webinar series. And so over the last 2 years, I've interviewed over 65 top CEOs, best-selling authors, and TED speakers who have shared their experiences, their insights with you. And so I'm really excited today to welcome Anne Whelan on International Women's Day, so a special day for sure. And so Anne is an entrepreneur, corporate director, and healthcare leader, as well as principal shareholder and chief executive officer of Seafair Capital. They have investments in community and behavioral health, wellness, and safety. Seafair was founded in St. John's, Newfoundland. So for those of you who know me, special props and super excited on my side, admit my bias there, and employs well over 1,000 people. She has received many accolades for entrepreneurship and leadership, including being recognized as one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women multiple times, including last year, 2021. She also was Atlantic Business Magazine CEO of the Year, as well as the Startup Canada Entrepreneur of the Year award winner, Anne Whelan. So Anne, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your hectic schedule to join us today.
Thank you, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here, particularly on International Women's Day. And, this is a rescheduled event. And so luckily it ended up being Women's Day. And so I put on the pink in honor of that.
Well, I think it's wonderful. And again, and acknowledging that, I would love to get your thoughts because of your involvement and your experience and all the great work that you've been doing and participating on boards as well. You're a board member for the Bank of Canada. I'd love to get your sense and share with the audience, where do you feel we are now in terms of as a society, and then where do we need to go? What are some of the key next steps that we need to take?
How long you got?
An hour. So we've got an hour for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So Craig, I think, I'll narrow that down to say, let's talk about Canadian society, because globally, I think we all know that women aren't in the same place everywhere. Now, there's lots we can do about that as Canadians, but, for the purposes of this, let's talk about, the world that we live and work in, because there's no end to the conversations we could have. And I will just say and acknowledge that women globally don't always even have basic human rights. The right to education, food, water, those things are often denied to women because of gender. And even as we celebrate all the successes today and as we aspire to new heights here in, the first world, I think it's important to really remember the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, so they say, but the world often rules them too. And so, my hope for International Women's Day is that it raises up all women and tries to remove the bias, that just exists everywhere. So, but for Canada, it's easier to talk about that because I have more direct experience with that. You know, I always tell this story that I think I'm far more of a feminist than I was even when I was a student, leader and student kind of activist at some level in university, because I was naive enough to think then that we were all equal. And I did believe that. And my daughter, I know, who, you know, when she was younger, she's approaching 30 now, but when she was younger, we don't really need any of that anymore, but we do. And we do in so many ways. The pay equity gap and even one of the things we talk about around the board table at the Bank of Canada is the lumpiness of the recovery. And the COVID crisis has, been more difficult on women, and more difficult on service industries where women often work, and more difficult in, rural communities. And so that's not that makes it a, businessman's world, right? In big cities. And so, we're not there. And much progress is being made, but I think that one of the big conversations that we need to start to have is, you hear a lot about women in the boardroom, super important. Women in leadership roles, executive teams, absolutely important. But how do you actually get that to happen is, it's not just, it probably includes some sort of quota or target or something like that, but it's not just that, because there's bias built in because of, who can give birth to a child. There's bias built in because, the ways in which women communicate and get things done aren't aligned with, our traditional definitions of leadership. And so there's a lot of talking about these issues that we have to do, and sort of destigmatizing the talking about it. It's not just affirmative action. It's not just to say that we're going to make sure we put women in these places. I mean, I had a guy say to me one time, "Would you like to be appointed to a board just because you were a woman?" And I thought about it, and I said, well, that might be the reason on the way in the door, but I can guarantee you it would not be on the way out. So I think that's a perfect example of we need to make space for that conversation at all levels of organizations, in government, in politics. I know a group of women who would be fantastic political leaders who wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole because it is particularly unfair to women. So I'm kind of ranting on about a number of things here, Craig, but I am an eternal optimist is the other thing that I would say. Mm-hmm. And I'll share with you a really personal story. So I believe that we can find a way to make this work. And on my executive team, and you know this because you and I have talked through this, we had a team of 4, and it was me and 3 men. And so I was going to grow that executive team. And, there was a person who might have joined that team who was a man. And I said, no can do. And, I wasn't doing that until I was comfortable and we had a plan for a woman to join that table as well. And, I had to challenge some of my own assumptions and biases around that. And this particular set of individuals were ready. That wasn't it, but I had to do some rejigging in the organization to kind of make all that work. But you have to put your money where your mouth is, and I think that's true for every company that publishes a diversity plan or a diversity and inclusion plan rather. And so I think this is we need to make it so, not just talk about it. There you go.
Well, thank you, and awesome. And I've already received several positive comments, which is great in the chat. And for me, just as a reminder, Anne has kindly agreed to take questions from you as well, the live audience. So take advantage of an opportunity to talk with one of the top business leaders in this country and ask any questions that you have. And one point that you have, and there are other questions coming in, which is great. You talked about the importance of creating that conversation. I love that about, you're very passionate about creating that space to have these discussions. what are some really powerful steps that leaders within organizations can do so that we have really constructive dialogue, and as you say, and moving it into action as well, so that we're not just talking about it, we're making real progress? What advice do you have? And a couple of people had sent that as a question to me in advance, so I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and there's kind of a lot of layers to that, because as corporate leaders, we are asked and expected to put together some kind of a plan that has a number of elements that are all important, but together they can still add up to not much, and I've seen that happen. We started a group 4 or 5 years ago called Making Waves to develop women leadership. Half those people are not in our organization anymore, and some of them decided they don't really want to move up, so I think that it requires those signals out to people at all levels of your organization. So you've got to be signaling it, both in the investments you make, in developing leadership. And not everybody wants to go upwards, but they want to develop in some way. So making opportunities available. But I think, there are times when leaders just need to have hard conversations with themselves. So under the cold light of day, Anne, are you doing what you ought to be doing? If you had a daughter, how would they fare in this organization? And I've personalized those things so that I can really kind of figure out what I need to do. And that may not work for everybody, but for me, I know what our goals are, and I know the challenges in achieving those goals. But you know what? If I had a financial target that I had to hit, I would do what I needed to do to try to hit it. So you got to do the same thing. You have to treat it with that level of commitment. And I'm going to say, because what motivates lots of CEOs is fear of failure. You need to be just as afraid to fail at that as you do about hitting your numbers. So that'll get you there. Yeah.
Well, I feel very fortunate to know you. One of the things I admire about your approach is that you framed it so beautifully, and I think it's really powerful advice, is that we have to be prepared to have the tough conversations with ourselves. And I think a lot of times, in discussions that I can have, we can naturally as human beings be quick to look external. So to look at, well, what someone else is not doing or what the situation isn't enabling us to do. And I think you nailed it so powerfully, where it's okay, things start with me. I have to look at, so what am I doing? What energy am I putting into the world? What tough choices am I making? What biases might I be reinforcing or messages through my own conduct? And that can be really uncomfortable, yet incredibly powerful to provoke the type of change that we're talking about. And to me, what I'm interested in, and just got a thank you from someone listening, and they had a question, and they were wondering, what prompted you? Was there an experience that enabled you to take that, almost that intense mirroring inward to look at, okay, having that honest and tough conversation with yourself? How did you learn to do that? What prompted you to acquire that skill or dedicate yourself to doing it?
Failure. Yeah, as I was growing our group of companies, I always, tried to do the right thing. It's up there in our core values. It really is who we are as an organization. And yet I looked around the room, and the leaders in all our organizations, or more and more of them, were men. And I said, this is not right, Anne. This is just not good enough. And what are you doing wrong here? And because we had the programs in place, we had, sort of an approach to diversity and inclusion. And at the entry levels into our organization, all that was going okay. But, so there were some biases. There were some, things around my own value around action and what that looks like, and decisiveness and what that looks like, and how I had to think about other ways to manifest those things that are, common in women. And not to overly generalize, I'm careful when I say those things, but women have different discourse sometimes. And so I had to really, really sit back and say, okay, there's nobody else who, if you can't make this happen, as the principal shareholder too, how can you say that? How could I sit here today and say anything else? But, you know, I could not talk about International Women's Day. So that didn't come to me, you know, because we were doing so many things well. It came to me because I looked at it one day and said, this is just wrong. It's wrong. So now on our executive team of 6 people, there are 2 women and 2 persons of color, and they're not the same people. So, you know, and so as a team of 6 in Newfoundland and Labrador, that's pretty good. And it was deliberate, and they are absolutely legitimate, high-performing people. But there was some deliberate choices in that.
Right. Well, and I love the importance, and you touching on this, Anne, around the importance of the failure, the setbacks, and then learning from them, and asking ourselves the tough questions. I think that's great. Christine has a question, and she was considering that the theme for International Women's Day is breaking the bias. What suggestions do you have? Like, what have you seen in terms of what positive steps can an organization and its leadership take to surface those biases and have real conversations around it?
You know, some of those biases, some training really works to help people identify it, you know, like the halo effect. So I remember doing that training once and thinking, oh no, I don't have that. I do. I mean, and it's because it's an unconscious bias. And so you have to really think about how that, you know, shows up in your organization. So like, I think there's important training, and I am always learning in this area as well. I say things, you know, that have moved from being okay to say to not okay to say, and I'm, you know, I make those kinds of mistakes all the time, but I you know, I'm try to be reflective and learn from it. And you've got to do the work there. You've got to actually kind of say, what biases do I have before you can, you know, realize how to break them. One of the ones I want to speak about for a minute, because, you know, women are delaying childbirth more and more now. And so, and you think about like tech startups and that kind of thing. And tech in general is, you know, there's kind of a bias against women, and it's about, you know, a bit of bro culture. It's the hours they work, it's the pace that things happen at. And, you know, it happens, you know, there's also a bias against age there, I would say too. But, you know, what happens is women self-select out of opportunities because they maybe want to have a kid and they're 30 years old. And how, you know, we have to figure out as organizations, how do we do more than just allow maternity leave, like woohoo, but how do we support women to not be held back by those breaks in their career? And how can we make the expectation not be that you go back to work 2 weeks after you had that kid? Because that's not right either. And so I don't know the answer to that, but you know, more progressive policies around comp and benefits and you know, but I would say more than that, it's not money, it's career progression that we sometimes limit ourselves on. And so breaking the bias means talking about it a lot, and it means educating yourself and others on what those biases are. I chaired a board where we implemented a diversity and inclusion policy for the organization, and it was, you know, a kind of an engineering organization, so there was, you know, a lot of long-standing processes, a fair number of men, particularly in the technical side of the business, and, you know, a good culture, a positive culture, but one that was pretty old school, you know, as those kinds of organizations often are. And it's an older organization, you know, in terms of its own history. And so everybody wanted to do the right thing for diversity and inclusion, but nobody truly had the same definition of what that actually looked like and how you had to go about it. And I remember having to say to somebody very senior in an organization, okay, you have to stop calling us ladies. So what would the ladies like to do this afternoon? Is it, yeah, no. So, you know, and he thought he was being polite. And so, but I also treated him knowing that he thought he was being polite. So, you know, I don't think that we do ourselves any favors when we start to crusade within organizations, or, you know, I think we have to allow people to, you know, come to that fountain and drink to some degree, and help share that information. And, you know, should it be women's work to do that work? No, but it should be leaders' work to do that work.
Well,
I went all over the place on that, and I often do, but, you know, it's like, how do you do it? It's not a program. It's a way of thinking.
well, and it was fantastic, and I love how you talk about this is an inclusive conversation. We're all a part of this. We all play a role, and we have to engage in it. And I think it's just so powerful to be thinking about, okay, so then where do we need to? What are the things that we need to do? And I love again that you challenge us to say, well, we need to have those tough conversations, the honest conversations. Let's get at, and as you were saying, we got to be aware of where the issues are. Let's just let's get that on the table, and then we can collectively figure out where do we need to go. So many questions coming in, and I'm not surprised. Loving your energy. And so Frank asked, what advice do you have for spouses of women who are wanting to pursue or further their career?
Go do it. Not sure. So spouses of women who want to pursue their career.
Yeah, supports the support.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What advice do you have for spouses of women who want to further their career?
I get it now. I get it now. I was like, yeah, well, if a woman had a spouse who wanted to pursue their career, yeah, have at it.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it now. So how do you support that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, I think it depends on the woman.
Okay.
You know, in my case, I have a very supportive spouse who's, you know, which is true in marriages, no matter whether it's about this or anything else. People, you know, I think most women need to talk and say stuff. They don't necessarily need you to solve that problem for them. So that's the first piece of advice, which is somewhat universal, I think. The second thing I would say is, you know, the women that I know who are trying to get out into the workforce or move ahead in their career often feel that they're held back by the balance that they have to try to achieve in their households, in their family, you know, the kids' soccer games or the housekeeping. I remember one woman sharing with me that, you know, her mother-in-law used to show up and kind of look down her nose at the mess in her house as she was building this fantastic business. And I said, well, hire somebody whose business it is to clean houses. Like, just, you know, farm out that thing. Well, I feel guilty about spending the money and all that. I said, well, you know, and she didn't really. What she felt guilty about was not being such a fantastic wife and mother, in addition to business owner, that she didn't do the house cleaning anymore. So she wanted to be perfect. So I think the space here is to find ways to have conversations about what you can't carry a bigger basket than anybody else. If you're going to carry, I want more career in the basket, some things got to come out of that basket. So if you're the spouse of that person who's trying to, you know, carry a bigger basket on her head, maybe help take some of those things out of that. So it's about supporting, getting the kids to the soccer game, or, you know, not worrying so much about whether the laundry is done, and, you know, sometimes you have to actively help take those things not out of the basket. Just say, not just how can I help you? Like, so I mean this in the best possible way, like find some household tasks to do. Women end up doing 70% of that. So just go do it.
Well, and I love one of the pieces of your answer, Anne, around, well, let's look at our own biases and or role definitions we may have and different beliefs around that, and again talk about, so what do we have to do, and we're in this together, and let's figure out how can we support each other in that way. So absolutely love it. I was curious, I mean, what we're seeing as we navigate through the global pandemic, as well as almost like certainly a preeminent focus on leadership. So, and a lot of people ask questions about, so what advice do you have for aspiring leaders? So where we are now, where we're going, what do you think are those intangible qualities for leaders to develop to be successful in their organizations?
You know, that's a good question, and I think the answer is changing every 6 months into this pandemic. You know, so I have to tell you that the last 2 years have been a period of almost reinvention, and in my own sense of what leadership is, and a much more personal connection to people in some ways, at the same time as being, you know, more apart. So, and it's interesting because, you know, there's a well-known study, I think it's McKinsey, who talked about the ways women and men lead, and they had a list of sort of behaviors that are listed as sort of feminine or masculine. And the pendulum has shifted about which things are important over the course of the pandemic. And so, you know, a lot of those feminine leadership traits are kind of in high demand right now. So that involves different ways of supporting people. You know, in one of our mastermind groups, we talked a lot about, you know, what the world, like the workplace now is wherever you are. And that is just so dramatically different. That's probably better for women overall. But I think for leaders, it requires that we find ways to connect personally with people in order to maintain connections. And, you know, that is new and different. I think one of the other things that it really requires is clarity of communication, because you don't get the feel of the place in the same way anymore. You've got to be very intentional in creating culture and in creating and maintaining communication and clarity about the organizational purpose. And you really do need to just build on that core sense of purpose for the organization and get people united around that, because they're not going to work anymore because their friends are there and, you know, they get paid well and they like their office, or, you know, whatever those hygiene factors are, I guess, are kind of gone or disappearing. But really, leadership now requires more authenticity than ever. When you've got a flat screen, you need to be able to come through that as a leader and be there with your people.
Well, and one of the things that I'm really curious to get your take on this, Anne, is that there's been a lot of emphasis placed on the importance of empathy and its critical role in terms of leadership. So I'd love to get your take in terms of how important you feel empathy is, and how can you exhibit that within a leadership role.
So empathy is a word that's tossed around a lot. And, you know, I think it's important that we first agree that empathy does not mean that you water down the lemonade, right? You know, it's because you don't want to create a culture of underperformance by tolerating, you know, poor performance over the long time because somebody has something else on the go, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But the idea of finding ways in your organization to understand people's needs and work to meet them and allow them to be their best selves in the organization and to be able to bring it is critically important. So, you know, it means that what suits Craig might not suit Anne. And it also means that if you all have to have this done by the end of the week, that one of us might be doing it at 2 o'clock in the morning, or might be trying to have a Zoom call with 2 crying babies, you know, in the room. And so we need to be real about those things. And we need to understand that human beings are the people that work in our organizations. They are the organization, and human beings have complex lives, and in some cases, much more complex than they used to be. And so, you know, we used to think about roles and think about, well, this person has this job and this person has that, but they're still Anne, they're still Craig. You know, they still have an identity that we need to be tuned into and understand how we give that person the best shot to do their job as well as possible, because that's good for the organization.
Well, And I love, well, so many things that I love about your answer there, and in particular in terms of just, figuring out what people need to be at their best in our organizations is in the best interest of everybody. So I think that's awesome. And most importantly, I love that you highlight the point, because I hear this a lot in the conversations I have a lot around empathy as well, and is that like it's almost like that then it gives permission, or I love the watering down the lemonade. I will use that. It's like, oh, well, we're gonna just not continue to pursue excellence. So it can be back to a bias, almost a mindset that, oh, well, if we're empathetic and we start to care, then we necessarily have to give up our high performance. And I love how you have contextualized that, because in my discussions I find that's almost a barrier where people see it as, oh, well, it's going to get in the way of what we need to do. And I love how you've articulated this enhances it, and we can't, that's not empathy when we are not continuing to pursue high performance.
Right.
I have another question, and I'm not surprised, because I love that you talked about that this era of leadership requires more authenticity, not less. So Gregory was wondering, how do you have any tips, tools, advice around how leaders can learn more about their authentic selves?
I'll go back to failure is a fantastic teacher.
That's the number one takeaway.
Yeah. I think we know who our authentic self is. I think most of us do. I think we're just somehow afraid of that person, or afraid that that person might not be good enough in the workplace. And so we put on, a mask of this or that. And certainly, we all have to, there is a work self and a personal self, but you can tell in a minute if they're really quite different. So, I always try to think about, if this, my work people are my friends too. And, how would you be among your friends, and how do you lead and get a job done and do all those things? Treating people in the way that you would treat your friends, which includes, some jokes you can't say that you might say to your friends or whatever, but so it's a dialed down version of that. But it also means that you can call them on stuff if you need to, but also if it's not that big a deal, you'll let it go from your friend. You'll just kind of, just maybe say something in passing or whatever. So it doesn't mean you become this, bon vivant in the work all the time. It means that if you ask your spouse or you ask your friends, they will tell you your best characteristics. So let those out, let those shine. I walked into my first boardroom on a national board and sat there and listened to everybody talk, and they all sounded the same. And well, and of course, I was, as a Newfoundlander, we communicate with a certain amount of color anyway. And I really thought I should dial that back entirely. And so I am able to. And so I said my blah, blah, blah thing, but what I really meant was this. And there's a lot of code speak. Code speak does not help organizations. So just find a way to say what you mean and mean what you say, with honesty and integrity and empathy. And that is your authentic self. So, work on not code speaking.
I love that. That's really, and it's not helpful. Absolutely.
No.
I have another question.
So came out of me when we had a little bit of a crisis, and the discussion was getting a little bit more pointed. Then my authentic self showed up.
Right.
And, I really think that this is kind of BS. I think we're kidding ourselves if this is, and I actually said it, and everybody said, yeah, what she just said. Everyone knew that. Everyone knew that. I was probably the last to that party, but I said it. And
Right.
so, I think we all know who our authentic self is. Love that person even with their failings. It's okay not to be perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, and it elevates, and you use this word, the humanity. We're all human. We're all on this journey, and so that we all have our failures and
We
challenge
all
areas.
don't know stuff. I don't know what that abbreviation was. I'm going to ask. It like even those things are
Yeah.
some people would never ask,
I,
and so stuff like that. Just don't be afraid to show up.
well, I love that point too, because how many conversations have I been a part of too, where someone doesn't ask what that abbreviation is? No one else has a clue. The only person who used it, and they might not even know. And now we've wandered down this path. So to
Right.
your point, embrace that and ask the question. And chances are, a lot of other people are thinking the same thing, and they just may not be speaking it. I've got another question from Linda, who loved your view on empathy and your linkage with high performance. So one of the areas she was wondering about. So how do you? She finds it difficult to deliver tough feedback. So and has shied away. So any advice around, because love that and really resonates your philosophy. So how can we deliver tough messages effectively?
Okay, so I can share with you a couple things. One is how we do it in our organization, and the other is a bit of really good learning that our organization did some time ago. So we actually, as a practice, try to give particularly the challenging conversations, but all feedback based around our core values.
Hmm.
So our core values, we all know what they are. So, they're community, integrity, innovation, um, determination, fun, and and then we describe what each of those means. And so one of them, for example, is we give each other the benefit of the doubt. And so we needed to talk, that's just an example. So if I need to talk to somebody about how they blew up at a coworker because of something or whatever, and you got to have, that conversation, then you frame it around the core values, because we all signed up for that. We all agreed to live those core values. And so it's important in your organization that if that's your approach, that you do talk about those core values so people have the learning that goes with it. We begin all our meetings with either a good news, personal and professional, which helps with empathy and helps celebrate wins for people, or we alternate it with a core value story where we talk about how ideally somebody in the room we're in lived one of the core values over the last week. And so once you know that that is how people perceive what you're doing as aligned with core values, it's much easier to have the conversation when in fact they're not. And most things you can draw back to that in some way or another. So that is really helpful, and it depersonalizes the feedback and says, this is a set of values we agreed on. And, I'm not feeling that from you in this particular situation. And, and you kind of can reset around it. It doesn't make it easy, but it makes it easier. And the second thing, which was really helpful to us, was we did a training program called Crucial Conversations.
Mhm.
Not sure if you're familiar with it, but it is about those tough conversations. And it
Mhm.
is, it is founded, I guess, in that principle of letting that person talk and finding some common ground to begin from, which is really rooted in empathy.
Mhm.
And so it's funny that we're talking about that as a thread through all of this, but so if you and I had to have a tough conversation about something you did, and I say, Craig, I didn't like that or whatever, it's a why, right? And we get to the why that happened, and how do we reframe that, and how might that be perceived in our organization? And often it unlocks a larger conversation about what's really going on here. And
Mhm.
so I would highly recommend that, and it gives you some tools to be able to have that core value conversation.
Well, and I love the observation you just made in terms of empathy. Is kind of, it's been a thread throughout most of our discussion this afternoon, and how it impacts multiple ways. And I think I really appreciate you linking it back to the core values, and thank you. Someone had asked what your core values are, so it's great that you articulated them. And I think it is such a powerful piece, because now what's happening is we've all signed up for these core values, and now if something is counter to them, well, now it's our responsibility as stakeholders to step in, and hey, if we feel this is important, well, we got to start to have a discussion. We need to have a discussion around this. I've got a comment from Tina, who had a smiley emoji and said, "Holy code speak. It is rampant in my organization. Do you have any," she said, it may be an unfair question, "do you have any advice for how to root that out?" So you have a fan and in code speak.
I would, you know what, if I would find opportunities to mention that in a way that is not threatening to any particular individual. You know, and like I remember once we actually played buzzword bingo. And so every time somebody used words like, you know, this or that or whatever, we had to tick and you got a bingo. And it just was a way to help us realize how much we integrate that into our conversation. And, you know, like the words, we all know what they are. And then there are ones that are particular to your organization. But, you know, if I hear one more guy go, "Let's take a look under the kimono," I am going to scream. And so, right, but
Yeah.
but that is part of all of that. And so I think we need to, now not everybody can do that as well as others. Like if you're known to be someone who's a little funny, like I can make a funny about that, and actually it's a fairly pointed funny, but everybody laughs. And you know, but there are ways to find allies in the room to have the conversation, because if you think it, other people think it too. And what you just wrote, holy code speak,
Right.
that might be a line. So, you know, I think make some room for that conversation to occur gently.
Well, yeah, well, and what I love again about what you're the buzzword bingo. So how do we playfully bring this up and draw our attention to it, so that, you know, hey, well, something's happening, let's find a way to be able to intervene. And I also really appreciate, because this is something, and it is a really powerful point that I find as well with different organizations, executives, leaders that I work with, we're trying to really influence positive change. And I love the point you made, Anne, around finding allies. Find people, you know, kind of do a little bit of testing and check in with people. And the more allies that we can find, well, then the stronger the likelihood we'll have more momentum around that. So really, really great point. I've got another question. They just keep coming in. Kirk was really appreciated the point about core values and has heard a lot about core values and had a question around it. Do you have any advice for senior leaders around how to construct meaningful core values, like good techniques to be able to identify them and then and communicate them and live them in the organization?
Absolutely. It's not my advice, but I can share it with you. There's an article that Jim Collins wrote called Mission to Mars, or something like that. That's in the title anyway. So, you know, it might be called the Mars Mission or something. But so he talks about how you identify that core purpose of your organization and how you start to set up core value conversations. So how we did it was we read that, and we watched a video, Start With Why. And we had a facilitated conversation about, you know, Jim Collins has, if you go to his website, there's actually a workbook on how to do all of this. So don't spend a ton of time on it. But what we did was we spent some time talking about what's really important to us. Like, what is special about this organization that's important to us? And we wrote it all down without trying to wordsmith. And then in my case, I actually was the initial wordsmith, because I put it in clusters and tried to find a word and then brought that back. And then we fixed it up, and then we started to use it. And use it does not mean putting it on a poster. Use it means putting it on a bunch of posters, putting it on everybody's desk, and integrating those core values stories into, that's how we did it, into your work rhythm. So if I have, if I start something like a larger meeting, I'm going to start it with part of our core values. We try to use those particular words a lot when we talk to our peers. We do begin those meetings with those core value stories, and everybody doesn't have to tell one, but you can ask a couple of people to do it, because you have to make them live within your organization. You have to make it so that everybody can take their, list them off, and then they're real. And then if they're not quite real, or you haven't got it phrased quite right, you will figure that out, because people will have trouble identifying that in their organization.
Love that, and the continual referencing to it, and very purposeful in terms of how you approach it, you and your leadership team, which I think is great. Chris was wondering, coming as we continue to move through COVID, it's been challenging, loves your energy, and wondering, what tips, techniques, suggestions to keep your own energy up, because feeling like their team is tired as well. So how do you keep your own energy high and your team high, especially after what we've been and continue to go through?
That's the question of the day, isn't
it? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we're all tired, and we're tired of working. And one of the things that's happened is, home is no longer the refuge, because now there's work from home. So Craig has helped me with this, sales pitch for Craig, I guess, but you have to be more intentional about creating that space in your life. And I am doing some things that I would have considered impossible a year ago. I try to have a tech-free Saturday. I turn off the phone on Friday night, I put it on to charge, turn off the ringer, turn off the thing. I have the text notification saying I'm not checking my phone today. And but if somebody calls twice, it will come through. So like the world won't, the house won't set fire without somebody being able to reach me. But I actually create that space, and it re-energizes me. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, I always knew this. If you don't look after yourself, then there's a point at which you can't look after anything else either. But you weigh that against a culture, and and a particular family culture in mine as well, that you look after everything else before you look after yourself. And that's deeply rooted in Catholic tradition, I will say. But I had to really remember that my looking after myself was so I could look after this organization that looks after people, and that I could lead it through this with, some clarity. And so I have actually really started to pay attention to how much sleep I get. And I've really started to methodically exercise. And I found ways that worked for me, and they weren't easy. I found a peer to make me do the exercise, and that's really working. But, and I will tell you, I'm bragging here for a minute, I could not bench press even just the bar. And now I can do like a 55, 25-pound weights like on each side. So this was like a hooray moment for me. But, and that is such an accomplishment for me. Like nobody has any idea how big a deal that was for me to be able to do that. And so when I see how with some focused effort I was able to get to that, it's re-energizing me to think about, with focused effort, what can I do for this business? And also it is remembering that it's okay not to be good at something, and it's okay to start from way behind. And so all of that has helped us get through this whole thing. And I feel I wouldn't have said this 2 years ago when I was, I wasn't having a panic attack yet. Around now, it was starting to sink in. But about 2 weeks from now, 2 years ago, I was thinking, oh my God. Well, and I consoled myself with, well, they can't take everybody's house. What would they do with them all? So that was scary. And I think everybody was scared, and we just stayed on high alert for so long. And now it's starting to, the air is out of that balloon, and we're all tired. So my advice would be look after yourself.
Well, I love that, and really appreciate that earlier we touched, almost extracted empathy as a keyword throughout our conversation, and another one that you've shared in different contexts, including at the beginning when we were talking about conversation, intentionality. So being intentional and being empathetic, really powerful, because, and I love how you made that point, Anne, about, and look at what we can accomplish when we're more intentional about those things and the benefits that it brings. So really great learning, and I've gotten lots of people commenting on how inspiring that is, so thank you. Time has flown by, so we've probably got a couple of questions left before we go. I'm curious, what's one big lesson you've learned about yourself during this pandemic, and what's a big lesson you learned about Seafair Capital, your organization?
Okay, so in addition to the one that I just told you, which is, imagine what you can do when you set your intention and you put the right, supports to succeed in place. So I learned that. I think I also learned that it's okay not to have all the answers, because nobody had all the answers. And I had the really bird's eye view of some of this, and it also scared the life out of me, to tell you the truth, because I sat on the board of the bank, and I still do sit on the board of the Bank of Canada. So you can imagine what the early days of the pandemic felt like in that organization, even as the senior governor, or the governor, stepped down because he had to. That was the deadline. June 4th. Doesn't matter if there's a pandemic or not. That's the day. And so, here we were, the board of directors. We've never done quantitative easing before, and I don't want to take too long, but just say that scared the crap out of me. Like, no question. I was like, oh my God, Canada. And so it's okay not to have all the answers. It doesn't mean that you can't lead. And I think sometimes we get, I'll speak for myself, sometimes thinking that I couldn't do it all or didn't know it all or whatever might have stopped me from moving forward. And so, I think you have to have the humility around that to say, I don't know all the answers, but I better go find someone who does. And so that was about me. And then about the organization, I remember sitting there and saying, okay, so what are we good at? If we can't do this, because it's, a lot of it is direct care delivery, and that just, if we can't do this, or this is going to be really hard to do and not profitable anymore, and so we have to keep doing it, but we're not going to, it's not going to work out that well for us. We were able to identify a lot of hidden strengths, and so, we use those, and we've got a couple of new businesses going out of that. One of them I expect will be we push it out as a spin-off, like a startup, and we're, hiring somebody to run it. And I expect we'll be raising some external fundraising and doing all those things. And so, like, we all possess those potential strengths. They're perhaps not even strengths right now, like my bench press thing, but, we all possess those potential strengths, and discovering them within your organization is very, very powerful. And I feel that we've done that with Seafair over the course of the pandemic, and are coming out the other end all the better for it. I wouldn't want to do it again, though, just saying. But.
Yeah, once is enough. Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
That's right. I've done. Yeah, I took out of it what I needed, and we can put that aside. And
thank you, universe, for sending that lesson, but you can take it back now.
That's right. Yeah, I'm done. And well, and I really appreciate your observations around the humility and the comfort with, and recognizing, hey, we don't have all the answers, and particularly in this environment where you shared right at the beginning of our conversation, Anne, about things just are shifting so quickly. So just coming to peace with that, and then letting it go, and then pivoting. And I love the focus on the hidden strengths. And I think this is something that, again, for all of us, we can learn from your experience and the mindset that you took, is that, okay, so we're in this situation, and then accepting that reality, as challenging it is, and say, okay, so what other possibilities are there? What other strengths do we have? How might we redeploy current strengths in a different way? And then, as you say, and from this, we are now, and we have a new business. And I think for every single one of us, we can stop at point A and then and not continue along and say, all right, so how do we, so where else can we go on this? So I love that. So one final question, and we're at time. So any final pieces of advice? This has just been absolutely a blast. I've gotten so many comments about love your energy and your insights. So yeah, I keep getting them popped up in my chat box. So any final thoughts for everybody who tuned in today?
Well, thank you all, and I appreciate this. And I'll say two quick things. Number one is that I always have a little bit of imposter syndrome when you hear, I do anyway, when you hear that intro and think, oh my goodness, I have to, I have so much to live up to. And so I just have to, I've learned to tell myself, but those things are true. And so I would say to a lot of people who probably at some level have the same thing as, those things are true. It doesn't mean that you're presenting as this perfect person. And that'll serve you well, I think, to remember that. The other thing is, and I want to leave that last thought to be about International Women's Day. I think on this call, I don't know who everybody is, but I'm pretty sure you're organizational leaders in some way or another. And I would challenge all of you to look at your organizations and just evaluate where you are in terms of who you want to be as an organization, not what quota you need to hit or boxes you need to tick, but are we there yet? And the chances are the answer is no. And how can I personally influence that? What decision can I make that personally will break that bias?
So great, and I love that. And yes, the authenticity, I got numerous comments about thank you for your candor and your authenticity, so they enjoyed that. I think that's wonderful. And I love the point that you just made as well, which is having an honest, back to the beginning, an honest conversation with ourselves about, so who are we as an organization? Are we where we say we want to be, or where we say we are? And then what can I do? What change can I provoke, influence in the world? So absolutely love it. This has been fantastic, Anne, and thank you again. I just want people, before we close here this afternoon, that next Wednesday have another session of the Do Good to Lead Well Through Crisis webinar, where I'll be welcoming Dr. Graham Scher, the CEO of Canadian Blood Services and an Order of Canada winner, to the program. And so he, similar to Anne, is going to be sharing his insights on leadership and be open to your questions as well. Before we go, Anne, just thank you so much for your energy, your insights, and your passion around this, and desire to provoke positive change and have a positive impact in our communities as leaders, as citizens. And I know it's an important part of who you are as a person, as well as Seafair Capital, and it is part of your core values. So really appreciate you and everything that you've done, and thanks so much for joining me on International Women's Day. This was a lot of fun.
Bye.
Okay, bye everybody, take care.